is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the motion, particularly the government's purported Housing Australia Future Fund, which, after so many months, has still failed to pass into legislation. During the election campaign in my electorate of Hughes, the biggest issue was cost of living, followed closely by housing affordability. This was a priority and a concern for young people who are currently unable to get into private ownership, and many are also unable to get into the private rental market. It was also a concern for the many parents and grandparents in my electorate who are concerned about their children and their grandchildren's ability to house themselves into the future. Deputy Speaker, in my first speech in this place, I spoke of my commitment to addressing housing affordability. Whilst ever the electorate of Hughes provide me with the privilege of serving in this place, I will be committed to addressing housing affordability as a top priority. My policy framework around this issue arises from my personal ideology as well as lessons learnt from a 25-year legal career spent in planning, property and environmental law, working both for and in the private and local government sectors. Ideologically, Deputy Speaker, my commitment to liberalism, civilised capitalism, unleashing the power of the individual and their enterprise while always providing a safety net for those who, despite their best efforts, are unable to cope. And that, Deputy Speaker, is what we must do in the housing space. At a federal government level, we need to facilitate an environment where we as a country deliver broader housing choices and a system that provides greater security of tenure, such as longer-term leases for our most vulnerable, many of whom are Australia's children and our returned veterans. And I commend the member for Indi, who also spoke on this issue today. The greater the number of Australians that own their own home, the greater the ability of governments to facilitate social and emergency housing. It is a housing continuum. Having spent my former career working in and around the housing sector, the housing fund that has been put forward by this government simply, and often for the best of intentions, but it simply will not deliver the housing that has been anticipated. It is simply a housing fund. It is not in any way a bill that's going to address the underlying issues of housing affordability within our country. It fails at very basic levels, for example, to look at defining key terms in the bill, such as the definition of social housing, the definition of affordable housing and the definition of acute housing. The bill also omits a major part of the housing affordability problem. It leaves out private home ownership, ways that the federal government can influence, empower and incentivise private home ownership. On the housing continuum, Deputy Speaker, as more Australians own their own home, they move out of the private rental market, which in turn frees up supply for others to move into this space, allowing more resources to be directed to social and emergency housing. Australia's rate of home ownership has been declining since the baby boomer generation bought their homes. At the moment, home ownership rates among Australians under the age of 40 are at levels not seen since 1947. Being able to afford a home is becoming harder and harder, almost impossible for most young Australians. Leaving private home ownership out of its housing policy means that the Labor government has failed to understand the way that the housing sector in this country works, ways that the federal government can incentivise state and local government to provide more affordable housing. It is disappointing that the Labor government has been intellectually lazy, and by these bills and the policy it's put forward demonstrates its failure to understand the drivers behind housing in Australia. A failure to understand how the various state planning systems feed into the national system. A failure to empower local governments to deliver at a local level. Deputy Speaker, for all of these reasons, I cannot support this motion, and I say that the Labor government has not done nearly the work that it should have done in relation to affordable housing in this country.